heroin,
methamphetamine,
mushrooms,
marijuana,
MDMA,
cocaine,
opium,
tobacco,
alcohol.
mind-altering experiences.
Why do we take drugs? Many of us take drugs to feel good.
I mean, there's legalized drugs and illegal drugs.
Some of them are synthetic in origin, some are natural in origin.
What are they? How do they work?
A drug is a small molecule that has an effect on the body.
any chemical that impacts the brain.
A drug is something that treats a medical condition.
And some medications are abused drugs.
Technology is allowing us to actually look inside the human brain.
As we learn more about the brain, we'll also learn more about how it functions with drugs of abuse.
An inhalant is a drug that exists in a gas state, so you can't really see it, and it's administered by breathing it in.
Inhalants are a diverse group of substances which are sniffed, huffed, inhaled, they call it bagged.
In terms of a historical perspective on inhalant, they're actually one of the oldest, because people have been smelling things forever.
There are stories of inhalants dating back to ancient Greece, where the Greeks would visit a high priestess called a Pythia. Pythia would breathe in vapors, perhaps a natural occurring gas like ethylene, and go into a trance. Then she would tell prophecies to the listeners. By the 18th century, chemical compounds were developed and commonly used as breathable tonics. These gases were also used for medical purposes, as doctors and dentists found that the gases would help keep patients from moving and feeling pain during operations. These chemical compounds include ether, chloroform, and nitrous oxide, which is also known as laughing gas, due to the euphoric effect it provides once inhaled.
Nitrous oxide, laughing gas. Many people, when they go to the dentist, may have used or had laughing gas to control pain.
The 20th century brought a wide variety of new volatile compounds into everyday use. Most of these are made through distillation of petroleum, including glues and cements, gasoline, paint thinners, polish, lighter fluids, paints, and enamels.
And these have no medical uses at all.
They're industrial chemicals that were manufactured mainly for as cleaning products, uses in paints. So they're household products, but if they're inhaled, they do act on the brain. And they can give you a sense of well-being, at least for the short term.
There are over 1,400 products that can be inhaled for intoxication, and the abuse of these is a global problem, especially among younger people.
Kids will sniff gasoline, kids will sniff paint, kids will sniff paint thinner. It's very common actually for girls to paint their nails with whiteout, which is basically pure acetone.
They probably have an easier access to some of these things. They're just in your garage or your shed or in your house.
Many of them are in the house, under the kitchen sink. And the reason they're more commonly used, and particularly among young people, is they're cheap and available for a quick high.
Inhalants are a class of drugs that are familiar to all of us. They are useful chemicals in household products. And unlike some other abused drugs, these can be legally obtained. The abuse of these substances can be termed volatile solvent abuse. And though they are classified under a broad category, there are three main subcategories: volatile solvents, aerosols, and gases. Volatile solvents are liquids that vaporize at room temperature, the most common of which is toluene, a clear, colorless liquid with a distinctive smell.
Toluene is a solvent. It exists in many things that we have in our homes, like nail polish, like paint, paint thinner, paint remover.
Glue, which has an odor. When you put it on a piece of paper, you can smell it. Well, that's the solvent you're smelling.
Aerosols comprise compounds found in products such as spray paints, hairsprays, pain-relieving sprays, cooking sprays, and air deodorizer sprays, just to name a few. Basically, any product that utilizes aerosol propellants. Gases are found in household commercial products, and some are also used as medical anesthetics. Medical anesthetics, such as ether, chloroform, and nitrous oxide, are also used to create a loss of sensation and consciousness during medical procedures.
So a drug like nitrous oxide is actually classified as an anesthetic. It doesn't prevent pain, but it dissociates you from pain.
Household or commercial products include butane lighters, propane tanks, and whipped cream aerosols or dispensers, also known as whippets.
One of the very common ways to administer nitrous oxide are using something called whippets. Now, whippets are tiny little canisters used to make whipped cream. So kids will use whippets, which are full of nitrous oxide, to get high. So whippets are very, very common.
Most of these substances act as depressants, which means they slow down the body's activities.
They're central nervous system depressants, so they reduce your breathing, they reduce your blood pressure.
You might feel high, lightheaded, some euphoria.
It's like alcohol. It has the same type of effect as alcohol without drinking alcohol.
A special class of inhalants is called volatile nitrates. And unlike other inhalants, nitrates, such as poppers and amyl nitrate, do not slow the body down. Instead, they increase the heart rate.
They tend to be more associated with club drugs, drugs like ecstasy. And what they do that's different is they tend to produce a more amphetamine-like syndrome where you become very active. They have the same kind of euphoria, but rather than having a euphoria that is subsequently associated with kind of just laying back and vegging out, they become very, very excited, very animated. So it's more of the stimulant side of the inhalant.
Inhalants can be breathed in a variety of ways, such as sniffing fumes directly from a container, spraying aerosols into a cloth or a rag, or users may inhale fumes from a plastic or paper bag that's been filled with an inhalant.
People soak a cloth with a chemical and put it up to their nose, or they put a bag over their head and just have the chemical within the bag.
These methods get the drug into the brain very quickly.
And the faster a drug gets to the brain, the faster its effects are going to be and the more serious its effects are going to be. So the faster it gets into the brain, the more addictive we'll say it is.
One of the key features of an inhalant is how quickly they work.
Inhaling is one of the fastest methods of taking a drug, allowing the drug to reach the brain within 7 to 10 seconds.
Inhalants get into the brain quickly primarily for two reasons. One, they get into the lungs, which is the largest volume. That's why if you consider smoking crack cocaine, more cocaine gets into the brain because of the volume of the lungs.
If you take a pill, it has to metabolize in the stomach before the drug reaches the brain, slowing the process down and weakening the concentration of the drug.
But if you inhale or you inject something, that doesn't occur. The drug goes directly into the bloodstream and then can quickly get into the brain.
The second reason is because inhalants are lipid soluble, which means they dissolve in fat. And the brain is 90% fat. So inhalants go to where the fat is stored, so they go to the brain very quickly.
Drugs do not contain highs. They trigger these feelings by altering chemicals in the brain that are used for communication between brain cells and neurons in different systems in the brain.
We can take it down to the brain's essential building blocks, which are, we call neurons, and each of these neurons or nerve cells functions in a very basic way through communicating with other neurons nearby by releasing specific chemicals. Just like we use the alphabet for communication in our language, brain cells and neurons communicate by using chemical language. And these chemicals, we know some of them. We're learning about these chemicals and how they function. And one of these chemicals that we've learned and we've known for some time now is dopamine.
Inhalants increase dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter responsible for triggering feelings of pleasure in the brain.
The same thing that happens with other drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine and nicotine. You cause a large increase in brain dopamine. And that increase in brain dopamine is what gives you the feeling of euphoria.
So there's a particular area, the reward region of the brain, where when you get increases in dopamine, you get this effect of a euphoria.
And not just pleasure from drugs of abuse, but pleasure from normal everyday events. If it's a nice day, dopamine levels are a little higher. They make you feel good about the weather, how nice the day is.
These natural surges of dopamine in the reward system are essential for our survival because they help us remember what is important in our environment.
The brain is programmed to feel good in engaging in certain behaviors that are critical for our survival and for our species. So food, water, and sex are critical for survival. And those are the natural rewards.
So it's a very important part of the brain because it tells us you need to eat, you need to reproduce. These are all things that you need to sleep. These are all good, important things that if you don't do, you won't survive or you won't pass on your genes. So an area that normally will have, a small amount of dopamine release from these nice behaviors, eating a good meal, listening to good music, now get a huge influx of dopamine when the person takes a drug. So now all of a sudden, that part of the brain says, wow, this is important. This is something I need to keep doing if I want to survive.
The difference with inhalants is that the amount that gets into the brain is far higher than the amount that gets into the brain of other drugs like alcohol, nicotine, or cocaine. So the inhalant will rapidly enter the brain. It will produce an enormous increase in brain dopamine, which results in the euphoria. And that rapid increase in brain dopamine disappears almost as quickly. So you get this, inhalants are known for producing a rapid high that dissipates just as rapidly.
Because the high from inhalants only lasts a few minutes, users often try and extend this high by taking more.
The effect doesn't last very long, so they have to use it again and again and again.
So it's just quicker, produces a huge euphoria, the euphoria disappears, and more of it gets into the brain. I've heard time and time again from kids that inhalants aren't addictive. I hear it all the time. In fact, inhalants are extremely addictive.
Addiction can be defined as a state in which you've given yourself over to something, made yourself dependent on this object or substance. The addiction happens with changes in the brain.
The reason inhalants become addictive is pretty much the same reason that all drugs become addictive. They start a cycle where you increase brain dopamine. When you increase brain dopamine, dopamine receptors decrease. So the way the brain works really is this very nice balance. When a chemical goes up, its receptor level goes down. In the substance abuser, we elevate brain dopamine, we lower dopamine receptors, and over time, that lowered dopamine receptor state never returns. So the addict is continuously trying to hit those few number of dopamine receptors they have left. And that's exactly what we see with inhalant abuse.
Once the drug is in the system and has affected the dopamine system, other chemicals are also pulled into the mix. Drugs of abuse end up affecting learning, they affect inhibitory control, so the part of the brain that tells you, no, don't do this, I know it's bad, stop what you're doing, that part gets affected. So all these other parts of the brain then get pulled into the addictive process.
Scientists are still studying further effects of inhalants in the brain, and they have found that all inhalants do not work alike.
The high from butane lasts a little bit longer than other inhalants, and what you see is the high school kids, the kids who are driving and huffing at the same time, have a large number of automobile accidents. In fact, the number one drug, or the drug that kills more kids in high school, with the exception of alcohol, we have to take alcohol out of the picture, is butane.
Toluene, the most abused inhalant, alters normal brain function.
And what toluene does, unfortunately, is with continued chronic use, it actually destroys myelin, which means it's also disrupting nerve firing and potentially leading to nerve death.
So what you see is changes in vision, changes in the ability to move, changes in audition, your ability to hear. So pretty much any place you take off the fat in the brain or the myelin in the brain produces an effect.
Chronic abuse can lead to changes in the body as well, causing damage to muscles and the lungs.
Some of these inhalants can be toxic to liver and kidney, and in extreme cases it can cause arrhythmias of the heart, which can lead to cardiac arrest.
Sudden sniffing death, as it is called, has occurred in many first-time users and is responsible for more than half of the deaths due to inhalant abuse.
You could actually just pass out or die, because what you're also doing is replacing the oxygen that you should be breathing and keeps you alive with these chemicals.
And we see this in whether you inhale acetone, that can be fatal. Toluene can be fatal. Xylenes can be fatal.
But it only takes once for inhalants. They're very toxic. Many times you use it by putting a bag over your head and filling the fumes, and so you can imagine you're not getting oxygen, you're breathing in this toxic gas. It can't be good, and many times it can result in death.
I think the thing that alarms me the most is that inhalant abuse, the prevalence, is really focused to young kids, elementary school kids, those kids whose brains are changing the most. So one can make a very compelling argument that using a drug at a time when your brain is changing the most may produce the greatest damage.
One thing we know is that the brain is still developing until you're in your early 20s. So if you're affecting that brain development, that could cause problems for the future. But we also know that because the brain is still developing, that's why kids tend to take more risks than older adults. And so there's kind of a double-edged sword there. I mean, it's designed that way because you want to take risks when you're young. That's how you learn. But at the same time, if you're in the environment where these are the risks you're going to take, then you could have a lot more serious consequences.